Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Is the bid for Palestinian statehood going to fail in the UN Security Council? What this rabbi's grocery shopping has to do with America's poverty, an entire month for social action, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The bid for Palestinian statehood is now almost certain to fail in a vote at the United Nations Security Council, just 1 week after a majority of members voted for recognition of a Palestinian state at the UN's cultural organization. French officials told a subcommittee of the Security Council that they plan to abstain from the vote when it comes up in the Security Council, when just last week they voted for recognition of a Palestinian state at UNESCO, the UN's cultural organization. The measure needs a 9-vote majority to pass at the Security Council. France was one of 9 Security Council members voting in favor of Palestinian statehood at the cultural organization. And now there's word that Bosnia-Herzegovina will also abstain, which means that there's no clear Palestinian ally that could provide the crucial 9th vote for statehood recognition. This is likely generating a particular sigh of relief for the administration of President Barack Obama and many others here in the United States, because without a majority voting for a Palestinian state, the U.S. won't have to exercise its veto privilege in order to block it. The Obama administration has repeatedly vowed to veto the measure if it came to that, but American interests could clearly have been harmed by such an action. As for just one example, Saudi Arabia had vowed to respond to a U.S. veto by opposing America in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen. Of course, though the French have now said they will abstain in the Security Council, their yes vote last week in UNESCO caught many by surprise, including President Obama. One reason could be that French President Nicolas Sarkozy reportedly thinks Netanyahu is a liar. That's right, the French president reportedly called Netanyahu a liar while speaking to President Barack Obama in what both of them thought was a private conversation, but was actually being broadcast to reporters through wireless microphones the presidents were wearing that hadn't been turned off. The two presidents were speaking behind closed doors after a press conference at the G20 summit in France, unaware that their microphones were still on. According to reports, Obama started the conversation by criticizing Sarkozy for not having told him that France would be voting for recognition of a Palestinian state at last week's UNESCO vote over the Obama administration's objections. Sarkozy, speaking of Netanyahu, is reported to have said, quote, "I cannot stand him. He is a liar." Obama reportedly replied, "You're fed up with him, but I have to deal with him every day." In an interesting reflection on media ethics, the comments by the two heads of state were not widely reported, though they were widely heard by many reporters. According to Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot, the reason for silence over the story was due to a report alleging that journalists at the event were requested to sign an agreement to keep mum on the embarrassing comments. If indeed journalists did sign such an agreement to restrict the reporting at the event, it's unclear whether they signed it before or after hearing the controversial comments. Of course, the explosive nature of the comments can be a bit misleading, since almost every other comment we hear from heads of state about other heads of state is prepared and rehearsed. But while Netanyahu clearly doesn't have a friend at the Palais de l'Élysée, he's also upsetting the far-right members of his coalition government in Israel by declaring that his government will demolish illegal settlement outposts in the West Bank. He is following the orders of the Israeli Supreme Court, which has ruled that several outposts are illegal, having been established on Palestinian-owned land. This is the third major announcement from Netanyahu that has upset the further right-wing members of his coalition in the past 2 months. His freeing more than 1,000 prisoners in exchange for Gilad Shalit also upset Israel's far right, and amid the delicate diplomacy of the Palestinian Authority's push for recognition as a state at the United Nations, one of Netanyahu's biggest critics within his own Likud party, member of Knesset Danny Danon, stood alongside Republican presidential primary candidate Rick Perry as he outlined an aggressive stance that criticized President Obama, with whom Netanyahu was working. It's interesting to see all these moves by Netanyahu just as he enters the second half of his 4-year term. Could Netanyahu, like the fallen Ariel Sharon before him, try to grab hold of Israel's center to try to win re-election? And given this week's news about Palestinian statehood, it's very likely that a diplomatic success to forestall the Palestinian statehood bid will further appease centrists while leaving the right wing unaffected. Of course, another issue for Netanyahu to handle is Iran, but a former chief of the Mossad says that Iran isn't as big a threat to Israel as the ultra-Orthodox within Israel's borders. Ephraim Halevi headed the Mossad from 1998 to 2002 and said last week that the ultra-Orthodox, or Haredim, could be one of Israel's most pressing security concerns. The growing Haredi radicalization poses a bigger risk than Ahmadinejad, he said, referring to Iran's president. Ultra-Orthodox leaders blasted the comments. The community making headlines for being dangerous this week, though, is the modern Orthodox or religious Zionist community in Israel. A West Bank yeshiva has been closed by the government after its students attacked Palestinians and Israeli security forces in recent years. Dorshe Yehudcha Yeshiva had been located in the West Bank settlement of Yitzhar, and two of its leading rabbis had been investigated by Israeli police after writing a book that justified the killing of children in war. Students and rabbis had been arrested for their alleged involvement in attacks on Palestinians and arson attacks on mosques. That led the Shin Bet security forces in Israel to recommend the school's closure, and the education ministry has now done so. In other crime news in the religious Zionist community this week, one of the most prominent rabbis in that community has been indicted on multiple counts of sexual abuse of minors. Rabbi Mordechai Moti Elon was head of the Hakotel Yeshiva at the time the alleged incidents are said to have occurred in 2003 and 2005. The indictment alleges specific assaults on two 17-year-old boys, one of whom was his student at the time. Moving on to stories of Jews trying to do good things for other people. A challenge taken up this month tries to raise awareness of what it's like to live on food stamps in the United States. Rebecca Honig-Friedman reports.
Pasta,
tuna fish,
rice, bananas,
a lot of lentils, a sweet potato.
It's no wonder these Jewish community leaders are so fixated on food. They've just spent a week living on a food budget of no more than $31.50. as part of the Food Stamp Challenge, a campaign to raise awareness about food insecurity in the United States. Rabbi Steve Gutow is the president of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, one of the lead organizers of the initiative.
The Food Stamp Challenge is an opportunity for those of us who don't live on food stamps, both to understand what it might be like and to also use this opportunity to publicize the sad plight of those people.
There are currently over 45 million Americans on food stamps, about 15% of the population, and a surprising number of them are Jewish.
Something close to 15% of the Jewish community lives at or near poverty, so there are a lot of Jews on food stamps.
Now, with Congress looking for ways to cut the federal budget, there's fear that funding for SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, more commonly known as food stamps, could be cut. And as participants in the Food Stamp Challenge found out, any funding cut could be devastating to those already struggling to get by on the average food stamp allotment of $31.50 a week.
I spend carefully but comfortably, and this was a shock from that.
Ruth Messenger, the president of the American Jewish World Service, has a regular practice of fasting one day a week, and even she found it difficult to get enough food.
I had certainly less food that week than I would ordinarily eat. But it also is a sort of brings you right face to face with how much food costs, how supermarkets are organized, how hard it is to find the cheapest form of anything.
I got to see for myself on a shopping expedition with Rabbi Ari Weiss of the Orthodox Social Justice Organization Ori Letzedek at his local Associated supermarket. For Weiss, taking on the Food Stamp Challenge was quite an adjustment from his usual routine.
Sometimes I buy meals individually and I don't shop for a week, and what I've noticed is I can't do that. I'll quickly run out of money.
For more on the Food Stamp Challenge, watch the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. Continuing that theme, Meredith Gansman reports on Jewish efforts for Social Action Month.
Take the Hebrew calendar month of Heshvan, a month without Jewish holidays, and add a celebration of volunteerism and community building. What do you get? Jewish Social Action Month. Funded by the UJA Federation of New York, volunteers of different ages and backgrounds are working together toward community-based social action projects.
UJA Federation is supporting 34 programs which involve over 100 organizations to help as many people as we can throughout New York City throughout the month of Cheshvan.
As a part of Jewish Social Action Month, young volunteers are bringing a little bit more green to the lives of senior citizens. For the program Growing Together, the Metropolitan Council on Jewish Poverty and Hazon are partnering with the UJA as a part of an intergenerational greening project to serve low-income seniors.
Volunteers ages 14 and up will be working with seniors to build window box herb gardens that the seniors can then put on their windowsills, and the volunteers will be back throughout the year to maintain them, make sure that the plants are growing, the herbs are growing.
Not only does the project create access for seniors to fresh fruits and vegetables, but as Stephanie Greenberg from the Met Council explains, engaging young volunteers and seniors is a growing experience for both generations.
Intergenerational programming, having, the young and old work together is always a successful program. The seniors love it, and they love telling their stories, like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I did that, and here's how, you can move forward. And volunteers really like it too. Volunteers always say, like, I think I'm coming to service them, and then they leave, and, they say it really was for me also.
Nat Suffren, a 22-year-old volunteer, enjoys spending time with senior citizens and appreciates the insight of an older generation.
I think there's a lot to learn from older people, and older people have a lot to learn from younger people. Probably more of the former.
An older participant in the program says there seems to be no generational gap when the seniors and young volunteers come together.
They seem to understand us, believe it or not. And I think they learn a lot from us, too.
For more on Jewish Social Action Month, tune in to the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. That's all for this week from all of us here at the Jewish Channel. Be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 291, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and now on Comcast Cable in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.